When we're talking about JavaScript, we want to talk about or be familiar with something called the document object model. And so there's that word object. So we're going to dive into what the document object model is because it's a very important part of allowing us to interact with our HTML elements through JavaScript. So let's just dig in and we're going to talk about JavaScript. So JavaScript, what is JavaScript? Well, first of all, it's programming language used to make web pages interactive. So that means that we have HTML, which is our main structure, CSS, which gives us all of the design and decoration, and then the JavaScript is what makes it interactive. It's what moves our carousels. It's what validates our forms and gives our user error messages, like you forgot to put in, your name or something along those lines. It's an interpreted language. And what that means is that when a computer reads your source code, it has to compile or convert your English characters, human readable characters, into characters or electricity or switches on and off or circuits with electricity or no electricity that the CPU can evaluate, analyze, and interpret, or interpret's a bad word there, but figure out what to do with it. And so if you're writing code, for example, C# or Java, you compile your code ahead of time. So you run your program and it creates an executable file if everything builds correctly. Otherwise, you get some big error messages. And then you run that compiled code. And so you'll run that. If you make changes to your source code, you're going to have to recompile, create a new executable, and run that executable. Interpreted means that everything is run line by line. It means that when your browser sees your human readable source code, each line, one at a time, is then at that point converted into zeros and ones for the CPU to analyze and figure out what to do with. It might not be as quick as a compiled version. That's much quicker, but the advantage on an internet is that if changes have been made, your user doesn't have to download a new executable file. It just reads it on the fly. So it's interpreted. It's read at the time the user is seeing it on your screen. The browser converts that human readable code into zeros and ones for the CPU at the time it's rendering that page to your viewer. And along the same lines then, all of that is done on the client's browser. It's done on the browser. We don't have to go back to the server in order to get new source code or to interact with the browser. JavaScript does, the browser can read the JavaScript, so we don't need another server in order to render our code. The browser can handle the whole thing. All right. JavaScript is object-based, which means that lends itself to what we're going to be talking about, document object model. And what that means is originally it was not designed or it wasn't created at the time when we had object-oriented programming, which means that we can now do with newer versions of JavaScript things like create classes and instantiate objects and do object-oriented programming. But it is still object-based, and we're going to see what that means here very shortly. JavaScript is not Java. It's similar due to a marketing ploy back in a day when JavaScript was called LiveScript, and it wasn't as popular as it is now. So in order to make itself seem more important, more plausible, it teamed up with Sun Microsystems, who had Java at the time, and I'm sure money was exchanged hands at some point. The Sun Microsoft said, I'm stuck on Microsoft today. Sun Microsystems said, you know what, you can certainly add our word Java onto your script so that people in the industry will think it's more viable. They're very different languages. They're certainly not the same. And we call JavaScript a scripting language. All right. HTML versus JavaScript, they all work together. It's the trifecta of web sites. We have our HTML, which makes the structure. We have CSS, we already did this, which makes the design. And then JavaScript, which makes it interactive. JavaScript uses events to make pages interactive, and we'll see that as we progress. JavaScript responds to events that the user creates, such as clicking on a button or those kinds of things. All right, what can I do with JavaScript? I can create content on the fly. So I can literally change my image source, but with a click of a button. So there's an event, somebody clicks on the button. I can change the image source, which literally changes the src tag on our image, and therefore our image changes all within the browser, never having to go back to the server in order to make that change. Create cookies, validate forms, create animations and slideshows like our carousels, build applications with JavaScript frameworks. So this is much more than what we're going to be handling in this class as far as AngularJS and React.js, both very popular frameworks. But we will be dealing with something called Node.js, which will be a nice bridge between what we're doing in JavaScript and then between Angular and React. So we'll end our semester doing Vue.js. What is an object? So if I told you that JavaScript is object-based, let's talk about what an object is. Well, if you've had other languages that you've been dealing with objects, it's the same thing. What is an object? An object is everything you can describe in our real world. A car, a desk, a person, a bank account, an animal. If I use the word car, you would create a car in your head, a desk, a person. A bank account is also an object. So we want to take our real world and in code, define it with objects. Every object has two parts in programming, properties and methods. And we'll see examples of this very quickly, but I'm just going to give you the big picture. So properties, an object has a property. Properties are nouns, something that is a characteristic of our object. What are some characteristics of a car? These are called properties. A characteristic might be model, year, color, engine type, gas versus electricity or something along those lines. A person, age, name, hair color. All of these are characteristics. A bank account, balance, customer name, account number. All of these things are nouns or characteristics or properties that help us describe the abstract or what all of those objects might contain. Right? If you think about a car, all of us are going to look at the car in our minds a little bit different. One might have a Mercedes, one might have a Fiat or a VW, but if we abstract those characteristics, all of those different visuals of a car all have a model. They all have a year. They all have a paint color. So those are what properties are. And methods then are things that that object can do. So a method, really, if you want to draw an analogy, is a function. If you think about what a function is statements that we can write in a block of code that perform some kind of action. It's the same thing. The only difference between the word method and function is methods belong to an object. So if you want to think about a method is actually a function, they behave the same. But when we use the word method, it refers to my object's method. In other words, a car has a method which describes how to make it eat. That probably doesn't work. A car probably has a method which describes steps to make that car go, start, move forward, move backward. So all of those would be methods or functions or blocks of code that define how to make that car do that action or verb. So methods are verbs or actions that we can do with our object. And we're going to see examples of that here very soon. So we have been talking about objects, and we have in the past done HTML elements. Well, we've called them elements and we've called them tags, but the reality of the issue is that these are all actually objects. So I want to draw your attention to this image first and talk about the window object. So the window is the original. It is the big kahuna. It is the first. It is the main original or the source of all of our other objects. And the window is comprised of three objects or three, what do you want to call them, children, or we can inherit from, whatever word you want to use. So one of its objects is the document object model, which we're going to talk about here, which makes up all of our HTML tags. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. There's the browser object model, and that is full of objects that maintain properties and methods in relation to our browser, such as what browser are you using? Chrome, Explorer, whatever it might be. Some information about the screen width, screen height, those kinds of things. Location would keep track of like our back and forward arrows, those kinds of things. So we have a browser object model, and we also have the JavaScript object. And so we will be obviously dealing with the JavaScript object a lot this semester. So let's focus on the document object model, which is depicted here. So if you look at this hierarchy of icons, and I'll also word that, some things should look familiar, hopefully. You should recognize, okay, let's even think of this as doc type. We have an HTML tag, and inside the HTML tag, there are two children. One is the head tag, and one is the body tag. And then inside the head tag, it has a child of title. We have lots of children inside the body, like H1s, anchor tags, on and on and on. And so these are actually objects that have properties and methods, and we're going to use these when we write our JavaScript. So with that being said, document object model, we're going to dig into what this looks like in our next video.